It feels like there's an all-out assault on fandoms going on, basically in entertainment and media right now. Now, one of the oldest real super fandoms out there, obviously, is J.R.R. Tolkien's Middle-earth. The Hobbit, Lord of the Rings trilogy, the Silmarillion, all the correspondence that J.R.R. Tolkien had talking about the history and lore of Middle-earth and all the things that went into it with the different races. He put in so much work building that thing out that for the most part, if you want to know what Middle-earth is about, how it operates, who the races are, and kind of the history of it, it's kind of all documented there. It's absolutely wonderful. It's one of the reasons people still cherish Tolkien's work to this day. Obviously, we've got The Lord of the Rings of Power coming out from Amazon. I believe they spent like $1 billion on this show. $60 million per episode. The best thing that they could come up with after people have criticized and given them very direct, honest feedback about the production that they're doing is to basically resort to name calling and calling your customers racist, vile things of that nature. It's absolute bullshit. We've been seeing this thing going on for years now. It doesn't matter where they do it, whether it's in comic books, tabletop gaming, television, movies, video games. They go in there, they take something that people like, they pervert it, they twist it, they destroy it, they try to give it back to you. And when the customer, the people that love the things to begin with and made them great, and one of the reasons that Tolkien's Middle-earth and all the things that go along with it, one of the reasons that people still know about it today is because the fans have been there the whole step of the way. They give it back to you, and then they just kind of name call you and say it's your fault. You're just an evil person, and that's why you don't like the changes that we're making within the fandom that you've been a part of, potentially for decades upon decades at this point. The Lord of the Rings on Amazon is essentially an enormous fiasco at this point. People have been telling them every step of the way, this isn't true to the lore and the history and the mythology of Middle-earth and what has been chronicled by J.R.R. Tolkien and what should be in here. Obviously, when you're adapting things from novels to television or movies, you do have to take some artistic license to put it into this new medium. Peter Jackson certainly did that when he made the Lord of the Rings trilogy. Obviously, he got tons of Oscars and all that stuff. And Lord of the Rings fans to this day absolutely cherish Peter Jackson and the trilogy that he made. But what they're doing at Amazon is they're bastardizing all the blood, sweat, and tears that Tolkien put into his world. It's only gotten worse and worse as the months have gone along. The Rings of Power executive producer Lindsay Weber made it abundantly clear the production and show would be eschewing Tolkien's work when she told Vanity Fair all the way back in February, it felt only natural to us that an adaptation of Tolkien's work would reflect what the world actually looks like. A fundamental mistake being made across entertainment. Nobody visits Middle-earth. No one goes and reads The Hobbit. No one goes and reads the Lord of the Rings trilogy. No one goes in and digs into the Silmarillion and all the history of Middle-earth so that they can see the world that they're living in today. There's plenty of movies and television shows and whatnot that are absolutely chronicling what it's like to be in the earth today and all the perceived problems that people have with it. The reason that you go to something like this or science fiction or fantasy is because you want to be taken into another world. If you are a hardcore fantasy or science fiction fan, obviously you will know that a lot of times the author, the creator, will use these worlds and these stories that they're creating to provide commentary on the things happening in the world that we live in today. But typically it's much more subtle than a lot of the things that are going on in entertainment today. In fact, if you go and read the Lord of the Rings trilogy itself, Tolkien is absolutely making some profound and damning statements on what he considered the state and kind of future of mankind that he was experiencing. The fact that people were kind of leaving nature in the past and moving into cities and everything was becoming very urban and commercialized and people were kind of letting go of their connection with nature itself. That bit of social commentary is strewn throughout all the work that Tolkien did in Middle-earth. And obviously, he was trying to get some messages out there about what he thought were some of the ills of modern society. But Tolkien is one of the greatest writers of all time. When you have a lot of these modern writers, they can't do that. They can only take a sledgehammer and decide that you're the nail. There's never any subtlety to the story. They never allow the reader to think about what the author is trying to say or what they're talking about to where they can come up to their own opinion about the things that are happening. They only want to tell you how to think. There's been a lot of very pointed, very direct, very honest feedback about what the producers and creators are doing with the Rings of Power, specifically with a lot of the race swaps. Tolkien went out of his way during his lifetime to really flesh out the different races in Middle-earth and their place within the history and the lore that occurred in that realm. People know what the different races within Middle Earth are supposed to look like, they're supposed to feel like, because all the cultures and everything have been explained for the most part to people. And they're taking drastic liberties because the creators feel like they need to take Tolkien's work and modernize it. To this point, the feedback has not been very nice for the most part. Ring of Power showrunner J.D. Payne has taken a Tolkien quote at the ready for critics of his Tolkien adaptation. He's taken to calling critics creatures of dull and lumpish nature that had no more language than beasts. Basically, if you have any criticism, any honest feedback for the Rings of Power, you, sir, are a troll. Executive producer Lindsay Weber is a little bit more direct about what she thinks of the people that are criticizing their work. We're all up for criticism, she says. We're not up for races. If you grew up on Tolkien's work and you've been reading the tales in Middle-earth all of your life, and maybe you've read The Hobbit 6 or 7 times, and you've read the Lord of the Rings trilogy multiple times and read through all the Silmarillion, and you have feedback regarding what they're doing with the races of the characters within the story itself, it's not that you love Tolkien. It's not that you want a faithful adaptation of Tolkien's work in Middle-earth. You have to be a racist, because they know if they actually got into a debate and they started talking about the works of Tolkien himself, in contrast to what they're actually creating, they would lose in a landslide. It's not even going to be funny. The amount of liberties and perversions that they're throwing into Tolkien's work. They are not creating faithful adaptations. People have let them know, we don't want your lame-ass bootleg version of Middle-earth. And they've said, well, that makes you a racist. And that's basically what Hollywood has to offer customers these days when they have criticisms, when they start destroying fandoms that have existed for years upon years. Oh, you're a racist. Oh, you're a homophobe. You just hate women. You're part of the patriarchy. And it's just excuse, rather than getting in there and understanding the criticism and feedback that they're receiving so that they could honestly go out there and improve things and give a better product. They only spent $1 billion on this thing. You would think they would want to get it right, but that doesn't appear to be the case. Morfydd Clark, who plays Galadriel in the upcoming Lord of the Rings of Power series, said, I didn't read the book and think, I wish there were more female characters, because I just took it as given that that was the way things were. I'm standing on the shoulders of women who split metaphorical blood to get to this point. I hope young people, should they watch this, will think this is just the way things are. And therein lies the fundamental problem with all this. You are not standing on the shoulders of women. You are standing on the shoulders of J.R.R. Tolkien, one of the greatest fantasy writers of all times, one of the greatest authors of all times, the creator of one of the most beloved fantasy worlds in the history of fiction itself. Not only are you standing on the shoulders of J.R.R. Tolkien, but you're spitting in the face of a fandom that has loved his work for decades upon decades at this point. People know what Middle-earth and the things that J.R.R. Tolkien look like and feel like because they've been immersed in them for years upon years. It felt like, at least initially, that Amazon and the creators behind the Rings of Power wanted to do something that was a real good interpretation of Tolkien's work. In fact, they went out there and hired a Tolkien historian to come in and consult on the show and make sure that they weren't, essentially destroying the legacy and the mythology associated with Middle-earth. Well, guess what they ended up having to do? They ended up having to fire the man because he was pointing out all the liberties and perversions that they were throwing into the show that weren't in line with the creations of Tolkien himself. It's not just the fans that are giving feedback to these people saying what you're doing with Tolkien's work is wrong. It was actually their own employee as well, a Tolkien historian who was brought on to consult because he knew Tolkien's history and mythology of Middle-earth inside and out. And he said, what you're doing is wrong. And rather than listening to that expert, they just threw him out the door and said, you know what? We're not going to create your Middle-earth. We're going to create our Middle-earth. And we're going to take our own personal agendas and we're going to throw it into Tolkien's work and present it as if it's a faithful adaptation of what Tolkien himself truly wanted. The problem is you can't do this with Tolkien's work. There are too many correspondents out there, historical correspondents. The man saved everything, and he talked to everyone about Middle-earth and what he intended with the lore and mythology and the history that he created for that universe. There's so many correspondents, not only with family members, with university professors, with other theologians and stuff out there, other authors, talking about Middle-earth and what he meant with all of it. It's fully fleshed out, and it works. That's why people love it. You can't take liberties with this like you can with some other creations out there that maybe really aren't fully fleshed out. You know, like a corner of that universe, but there's this entire world sitting around it that you don't know about. Middle Earth isn't one of those things. And people have been telling them time and time again, you are making mistakes, but they will not hear it. Even the media have been calling them out on their bullshit as of late. The Hollywood Reporter describes a moment at the Television Critic Association semi-annual press tour on Friday. The congenial panel's most lean-forward moment might have been when a reporter called the highly anticipated fantasy show only vaguely connected to author J.R.R. Tolkien's work compared to the Lord of the Rings movies, which were based on actual printed materials. This is what Patrick McKay, the other showrunner, along with J.D. Payne, had to say about that. I just want to sort of quibble with the vaguely connected. We don't feel that way. We feel like deep roots to this show are in the book and in Tolkien. And if we didn't feel that way, we'd all be terrified to sit up here. We feel that this story isn't ours. It's a story we're stewarding that was here before us and was waiting in those books to be on Earth. We don't feel vaguely connected. We feel deeply, deeply connected to those folks and work every day to be even closer connected. That's really how we think about it. It's great that that's how the showrunners of the $1 billion show would like to feel about it. Like, oh, we've only done faithful adaptations of Tolkien's work. But proof is in the pudding. Actions speak louder than words. And J.D. Payne and Patrick McKay can feel totally connected to Tolkien's work, and they can totally bastardize it at the same time. The proof is in the pudding. People have seen what they're doing. They've seen the liberties that they've taken with Tolkien's work and the history of Middle-earth, and they're tired of it. They're not putting up with it anymore. You can talk a good game all you want, but at this point, there's enough evidence out there that what the Lord of the Rings of Power from Amazon is a complete perversion, distortion, a twisting of J.R.R. Tolkien's life work when it comes to Middle-earth and the lore and the mythology that he created with his own blood, sweat, and tears, and that the fandom brought forward for decades upon decades afterwards because they felt so connected and love returning to that world so they can live these wonderful adventures with these characters that are going to live on for hundreds and hundreds of years past any time that we're here on this earth. J.R.R. Tolkien's work speaks for itself. The fandom speaks for itself, and they've made their voices heard loud and clear. But of course, the people behind the scenes can't accept that. You can only be a racist if you have a problem with the liberties that they're taking with Tolkien's work. You can only be a misogynist if you have a problem with Galadriel being shown in a manner in the show that does not even come close to the way that she was presented within Tolkien's work itself. You are the problem, not them. We've been talking about fandoms being destroyed for a long time right here on the channel. In fact, I had RJ from the Fourth Age come and join me here, and we talk about the destruction of fandoms, specifically about Tolkien himself. If you haven't seen this conversation, if you haven't heard RJ and myself break this stuff down, this was a great video, one of the best conversations I've ever had on the channel. Definitely check this out if you haven't seen it yet.